Making video games is hard, a fact I'm sure anyone who's so as much booted up Unreal or Unity and been horrified at how many things there are to do can attest to, and it's a fact that I know intimately well as someone who's been doing video game music for close to a decade. I've been involved on indie projects of all sorts of sizes, I've been on game jams, on mods, and all of that experience is something that sits at the backbone of the content that I make. While I'm writing about and playing games, it's hard for me not to be wondering about how the project got started, who all worked on it, what the development process was like, what came after for everybody, and any number of other things, because for me, those aren't just interesting questions for facts or trivia, those are the realities that made the game what it is, and they're ones that I live with every single day for my own games. And with gaming growing ever more popular, and by extension the development of said games, it's kind of surprising to me that stories about creating them haven't really taken off. And pretty much everything has stayed in a niche realm, like with indie titles, some VNs, and a couple of anime and manga like Koide Oshikoto, which is actually pretty great. Go watch that if you want an hour of hot and heartwarming ecchi comedy romance about a girl discovering and accepting her own body through the art of moaning into a microphone. The only example I know of that got any level of mainstream success was New Game, but that really just uses game dev as a backdrop for some fun, cute moe shenanigans rather than engaging with it on a deep level. If you're like me and that's what you're after, something that's the games like what Bakuman is for manga or Shirobako for anime, then you gotta go a bit deeper. Because within this tiny little genre, you'll sooner or later stumble upon one particular piece that stands out. One that earnestly wants to talk about what it's like to create games in an era long gone, that blends reality and fiction into a single cohesive narrative to bring to light the struggles and successes of the world of game creation and the people who make it possible. 16-Bit Sensation, a dating simulation game made by me and everyone, is an indie manga, one of many things that falls under the category of doujinshi, released initially at Comiket starting in 2016 by Cut-A-Dash before being picked up by Kadokawa, and created by collaboration of Misato Misumi, Amayuzu Tatsuki, and Tamiki Wakaki. Visual novel and eroge enthusiasts will recognize the first two from their work at Cocktail Soft, Leaf, and Aqua Plus on titles like Two Heart 2, the Utawarerumono series, Pia Carrot, Comic Party, and White Album 2, while anime and manga fans may know Tamiki for his work on The World God Only Knows, aka Kaminomi, and smaller series like Magical Star Canon 100%. These three together, along with input from other fans and creators, pulled together experiences working in the visual novel industry and watching it grow in the 1990s and early 2000s, and put it all into a story that strives to put forth the love these people have for the craft of creating games. It is the one piece of media I've seen that truly understands the high highs and the low lows, the surprises and the disappointments, and the successes and failures of game development on a level that genuinely reflects what it's like to be in the industry. And it's the way that it accomplishes this for a seamless blending of fiction and non-fiction that really makes it stand out to me, mixing original characters and companies based on real people and real places into a highly accurate and true-to-life recounting of 1990s Japan. It makes for both an expertly crafted and informative story told in a format far more accessible than a Wikipedia page or a blog run by a grumbling old man, and also invites deeper discussions about what this kind of emotionally resonant, somewhat fictitious work can be called, and how we think of fiction as a whole. Since I first heard about this manga all the way back in the beginning of this year and attempted to read the very beginning, but stopped a chapter in because my Japanese was at a baby level, it stayed in the back of my mind until I saw it once again sitting in my stack of things to do about 2 weeks ago, and I have been obsessed with it since and eagerly waiting for the series to continue. So, if you'll indulge me for a moment, I want to invite you to go along with me as I describe just why I love this manga so much, even if we're only 8 out of who knows how many more chapters in. It's rare for me to encounter anything that resonates so strongly with my experiences and feelings, and more than that, it's a tale that made me genuinely reconsider how I think about stories as a whole, and that is something I am more than eager to share with everybody. And also, maybe this video can get Kadokawa to release this in English so I can share it with more friends? Our story takes place in 1992. Across the globe, new trends are sweeping the world and things are changing, and Japan is no exception to this. Following the economically prosperous 80s of a massive rise in consumerism, in part thanks to the so-called bubble economy in the latter half of the decade, that all changed when the bubble burst and gave way to a mass economic depression and a new era of uncertainty. This is the world that 19-year-old Meiko Uehara finds herself in. Cheery, creative, full of energy, and a talented pen and paper artist, she's your typical peppy college first year, looking for work anywhere she can to pay for her bills and get that ever-elusive driver's license. She ends up taking on the role of a clerk at the nearby computer store PC Shop R, selling games and parts to customers despite having no clue what the hell a computer even is, until her boss pulls her away one day to ask for some help. One floor above where she works, sitting above the computers, the scuzzy cards, and the shelves full of shockingly erotic games, is a little-known fresh company by the name of Alcohol Soft, a homage and parallel to the real-world Cocktail Soft, developing their first game for the NEC PC-98 home computer. Run by store and company owner Shoutouts, she soon finds herself taking on the role of sub-artist with the help of Kari Shimoda, over time learning the ways of creating art for games with scenario writer Kiyoshiko Mikawa and programmer Mamoru Rokuda. Of course, things aren't always so idyllic. Developers fight, teams fracture, CEOs lie, consumer expectations grow, and in an era like the 90s where everything was changing at a rapid pace, it can sometimes feel like the world is leaving you and your passions behind. Yet for all of that, one thread remains constant: a love for games and telling our stories. While this premise itself could go any number of ways, be it cute girls doing cute things or some gigabrained way to get a couple of attractive characters hooked up, 16-bit Sensation always stays true to the premise of creating games and looking at the lives of those who do as they grow with their craft. While everyone serves a particular role and is interesting and important in their own ways, Meiko and Kari share the spotlight for the main focus of this manga. The former is, as described before, a cheery, happy, and lovable little thing that reminds me maybe a little bit too much of myself, except with an actual fashion sense. She's curious, inquisitive, and a really good learner, but is also sorta empty-headed in the most adorable and charming ways possible. It's the cutest shit ever to see her get excited over making small achievements while being surprised at her own gradual progress later down the line, over time becoming a wizard in her own field without even knowing it. But that doesn't make her immune from making the same kinds of computer mistakes that we all do, or just generally being a goof. Her understanding of her field grows alongside the audience, and through seeing her whole journey from a pen and paper artist to directing an entire game by herself, you get to learn an immense amount about her, who she is, what she dreams for, what she wants to see in media, and how she deals with the world around her to make her dreams happen. Beyond this just being great character building, cleverly using the framework of game development, her starting out as an absolute newbie gives the manga an excuse to give information about the old machines they work with to both knowledgeable enthusiasts and people who have never touched a computer in their life alike. The story gets a lot of mileage out of using the evolution and limitations computers at the time as a way to build those characters, and telling a shocking amount about each for seemingly mundane things like the specifics of how drawing game CGs works, the shift from 16 to 256 color artwork, and how people interface with machines that were less than straightforward to operate. I'll be talking way more about this later and how intricately the oddities of working with computers in the era is weaved into the story, but as it pertains to dynamics, it's a major part of why Kari works so well as a deuteragonist. She's someone who knows the ins and outs of the hardware she's working with, at least as it pertains to creating art. The two initially bond over Meiko being taught the ins and outs of making artwork for the PC-98's famous 16-color graphics system, a job Kari is perfectly suited for with her sweet and loving One-sama type of aura, and one where you can clearly tell she cares a lot for all those around her, yet also has the authority and strength needed to stand her ground. And just like with Meiko, different situations bring out different parts of her. She has a very logical way of thinking through things, and usually correctly, trusts that logic to be the correct way of handling a situation, even if her reasoning can cause her to doubt her friends. And yet still, she's boundlessly patient and willing to work through a lot before she has to resort to ultraviolence. The back and forth of these two for the entire series is one of the strongest parts of it, and the dynamic they have is enchanting to watch in action, one that slowly evolves from mentor and student to absolute equals, yet through all of it they never lose that close bond forged early on. Focusing on these two is not to imply the other characters aren't equally as interesting, because they're all pretty great, including Sho, the owner of Alcohol Soft, who almost exclusively goes by Tencho for most of the manga. He's a charismatic and fun dude who simultaneously embodies the best and worst of corporate higher-ups, often managing things well and caring for those working under him, but he's more than just a bit susceptible to prioritizing his wants and desires over those of his employees, given the money to do so. He's not my favorite of the bunch besides Meiko and Kari though. If I had to pick one, it's probably a tie between Kikiko and Dadako, a pair of twins who join in later on to write scenarios in the absence of Alcohol Soft's original writer, Kiyoshi. Collectively known as Kikidada and functioning as some weird mentally linked creatures, these two bring this incredible energy and fire to every single scene they're in, be that cosplaying as Rei and Asuka from Evangelion Komiket, or getting really in character for crafting new creative scenarios. Between all of those and the other smaller characters like Tencho's genius programmer son Mamoru, the blunt and charming PR woman Hashimoto, and those they encounter on their business ventures, the 8 chapters that exist so far and seem to be building up to a climax of sort of the early 2000s already paint a vivid picture of the kinds of people who make games, even in genres you might not expect much diversity in. Something that people often forget or simply don't know is just just how many women work in the Japanese erotic games industry. Obviously, there's plenty of voice actors needed to really make the girls in the games come to life, who contribute plenty of the vision to those games and characters, but throughout the entire history of the genre, illustration in particular has been an important field for women. They've been an integral part of both older series like Rance and Pia Carrot, and newer titles like Clannad and Nekopada, the illustrator of the latter owning her own company. Suffice to say, there's always been places for them to show their creative talents alongside men, carving out their own space, with directing and writing as well continuing to become more popular for them. From sweet and soft hetero romances to the brutal erogudo scene, from messy gay pairings to complicated explorations of masculinity and power, women have been involved in more titles than one might realize, which is part of why I love the decision to portray them here as driving creative forces. It's an honest representation of people who played an equal part in making these games happen from the very beginning, and quite often made them pretty damn subversive. Just slapping some women in wouldn't be enough to actually portray the diversity of the people working in these games, however. They need to be actual, genuine people who bring their unique voices and experience to the titles, people who have their own holdups and personalities and emotions that affect everything they do, and that's something this manga does with flying colors. I'm gonna draw comparisons once again to New Game, both for its popularity and because of the fact I've actually watched a decent chunk of its anime adaptation. It was the first show in Japanese I was really committed to trying to finish, and failed at because I only got fucking 6 episodes in or something before I got distracted by a fly, I have no clue. And a big part of that was because the characters were simple and cute in a way you'd expect from something originally branded as a moe show and originally in the form of a 4-koma manga. The simple dialogue and plots made the show approachable for learning and easy digestion, but looking back, I can't say I really saw much depth in it beyond that. Sure, the series does touch on some realities of creating games, and there's some story threads, but for the most part it's really just an excuse to seat a bunch of cute girls together in a room and let shenanigans happen. Nothing about these characters really affects the product they create because this isn't a series about making games, it's only about girls who happen to make them. And that's fine, we all need some girls making vague gestures towards being gay for each other in our lives sometimes. But with that show and really any slice-of-life moe that isn't utterly top tier in how it executes the shenanigans, like say K-On!, there's this underlying feeling to me that something more could be done with these characters in this setting other than being highly marketable to otakus. This is precisely why I think 16-bit Sensation succeeds in utilizing its setting and history effectively where New Game failed, or perhaps never even wanted to capitalize on. Meiko is perhaps a perfect example of this, as from the very start, she struggles with something immensely important to being an eroge artist, drawing nudity. Unlike Kari, who has zero issues putting tits on pixels for the whole gaming world to see, Meiko is really uncomfortable with it, something that Kari reassures her is okay. That sweetness and purity she has gives her art a unique flavor they can use. And this isn't a bit that exists as a one-time gag or a short little plot thread. This is something that affects how she creates games throughout the entire manga. During the latter half of the 90s, where games started to focus more on romance over being purely erotic, Meiko finds herself perfectly situated to direct games because of where her passions and her comforts lie, and it allows the company to continue succeeding and her visions to come to fruition. Meanwhile, other characters reacted differently to these changes. The late 90s saw visual novels as a genre shifting into being more and more story-focused to the point they not only looked and felt different, but they played different too. Meiko may be entranced by Two Heart, a title that helped lead the push away from games focused on sex and into story-heavy romances, but Kari finds herself wondering if these are even really games now. The struggle she and other characters have to accept that times are changing and fast is something that Volume 2 hones in on a lot, and those feelings are something that still exists within a lot of older otaku. Both of them feel genuinely human in the way they interact with the world and others around them, and really every single character is like this. Everyone has their own flaws and weaknesses that contrast and conflict with others, all of which are highlighted or pushed away depending on what's happening in the story and in that current era of gaming and computing. If it isn't already clear, all of this history, the uncertainty of the future of eroge as a genre and the way it evolves, the shifting tides of computer technology that forces everybody to address things differently, is a core part of 16-bit Sensation's story. While neither Alcohol Soft nor its staff may have exactly ever existed as they do here, the world they inhabit is a very historically accurate 1990s Japan with only inconsequential deviations, and the challenges they experience are incredibly honest and real depictions of what game development was like at the time. Because of that, the manga ends up in a very unique position to inform readers about the era it takes place in. One of the most prominent ways this shines through in the first volume is in how the manga meticulously weaves history and facts about how working with these older computers was. The very first chapter of this manga has an entire 4 pages where we learn alongside Meiko how art was created on the PC-98, the relevant graphics subsystem of the computer, and what limitations were faced by artists of the era. Another chapter goes over some of how creating 256 color art on Windows was done in the early days, through a combination of Photoshop, pen tablets, and color-reducing programs. Everyone looks on in awe at Meiko's ability to use it so effectively already, but later on, she has to be the one to teach the rest of the team the new techniques for it, a process that she doesn't really manage to pull off successfully. While the technical parts of this might sound like they'd be exhausting to read and bogged down by jargon, it's all slipped in so seamlessly that I often didn't even realize I was learning. The bit about reusing unsold floppy disks for their next game to save on manufacturing costs doesn't feel like a lesson in how companies of today saved cash, it just feels like a funny thing that happens. The same goes for character drama too, with some of Mamoru's arc being a prime example. The dude was playing with PC-98s before he could even speak, and so throughout the manga you have everyone relying on him for his knowledge of the specifics of the hardware they're working with, for programming incredible code, and for getting software up and running. That deep technical knowledge, which is both moe as hell and sincerely useful, comes back in an interesting way for drama once the Japanese computer games industry shifts away from the PC-98, a platform which necessitated programming and understanding the hardware at a low level, and towards Windows, which abstracts everything behind layers for the sake of wider hardware compatibility. If you aren't familiar with computing like most of the cast is, that doesn't sound like a big deal, right? As Meiko says, programming is programming. But like Mamoru clarifies, the two are nothing alike. It's a change that upsets him greatly and even leads to him briefly quitting, swearing to be the 98's lone guardian if he has to. At least until Kikiko and Naruko convince him to come back. It's a cute plot about growing up and learning to embrace new things with the help of your friends, but it's also super educational about how the shift from one type of computer programming was a struggle for developers at the time, and really always has been. Moving to new systems and learning new platforms sucks. One only has to look at the awkward-ass Jink period of the early 7th gen, and the number of horror stories of incredibly capable creators being unable to make sense of the complex new toys to see how much programmers have always struggled to adjust. It's not just computers that are important here though, the games of the era also play a pretty huge role in the progression of the story. Devs at that time could be close-knit and at the very least were often paying attention to each other. If you had a big release, people were gonna tear it apart and try to up their own game. While not every heavy hitter is covered here, the story still brings you on a great tour through many landmark hits at the time, why they were so important, how other developers were reacting to them. Be that through worry about their own games being inferior, through studying them to learn new techniques, or just enjoying the craft of others. The characters react to every new title that's introduced with either this kind of wide-eyed admiration about what's possible within the realm of edoge, or fears that their way of thinking about this genre is getting outdated, which makes even games that are pretty quaint by today's standards fun to learn about. Some of them are still damn good too, like Dokusei or Isaku, and others are just cool curiosities that shaped an era or just simply represent one well. But what I love the most about this is how each of these games make a notable impact on the staff of Alcohol Soft. Even when they're just enjoying them, you can tell there's gears turning as they find ways to take what they enjoyed in those games and apply them to their own work. A big part of game dev people don't really talk about often, but is impossibly important. As a musician, and one who often works in retro games in particular, I spend a lot of my spare time trying to listen to as wide a range of music as I can to diversify my knowledge. If I spent all day composing or only ever listened to one kind of music, then chances are what I create would very much only fit into a single style and never progress much artistically, which doesn't fly in a world where you need to be capable of countless styles. This studying was particularly important at the time as throughout the 90s, the edoge industry was rapidly changing. Art was becoming better and better and more advanced on the PC-98 to the point a game from 1990 and a game from 1995 looked like they came out on completely different computers, and by the end of the 90s, everyone made the move to Windows, which necessitated changing everything. Not just programming techniques as previously mentioned, but how music and art was created as well, since the former was no longer really confined to working with old Yamaha sound chips. You could have music burned onto a CD with fancy real instruments and big budget synths, and you could reliably expect everyone to be able to access this instead of the couple of people who paid for a CD drive. And for artists, that 16 color limit was a thing of the past. You didn't need a big fancy expensive video card for this anymore. 256 colors was all the new rage and everybody got it, with new techniques and software coming with it. And a key part of learning how to use all these things was to study others. It's not just games that developers had to and still have to study too. There are many points in the manga where their best works and greatest moments are created not just from an intensive study of other games, but through interacting with the world itself. From seeing a beautiful woman at a flower shop giving Meiko the idea she needed to make a CG truly shine, to Kyonshi offhandedly suggesting to Kari what the protagonist of the game about Komiket should be like, there's a lot of great moments where these characters learn from the world and the people around them, which is way more common than just coming up with an amazing concept out of thin air. My favorite example of all this, however, comes in really early on when Meiko and Kari play Dokusei and are blown away by the quality of the art in it. And rightfully so, as it was by far one of the most impressive looking games on the PC-98 up to that point. From there, they end up enlisting the help of Mamoru to crack the game's encryption, and are able to dive deeper into the individual CGs to learn the techniques they were so floored by. I was just about screaming when I saw this because holy shit, this is the same process I go through when I hear a really good song in the NES or something and want to know more about it. This manga has quite possibly the deepest appreciation and love for the craft of creating games that I've ever seen. A love that can be felt pouring out from every single page, every plot, every line of dialogue, and every piece of art, of which that love can be owed equally to everyone responsible for making this. Speaking of responsibility for making things happen, did you know there are cool channels I want you to know about that inspire me, and my Patreons that help keep me, and by extension this show, funded? Well, slowly but surely, I think I'm getting back on schedule. I'm still recovering from that whole my laptop is dead disaster, pushing production back a bit, as well as just general life events slowing things down, but at least this video didn't get too far off time. I am seriously considering covering a game that's like only a couple hours long and not super dense, since the next major video I have planned is probably going to be long as hell, but you know, I'll figure that stuff out. I just need some sort of break from these super long things. Still, I would not be able to do any of this at all were it not for my patrons and donators. As always, I'm thankful to anyone who gives even a single cent, because it all adds up to make it possible for me to keep going. We just recently crossed 580 monthly, which means that I am officially no longer needing to worry about rent. I'm not entirely scot-free for living right now. I still have to supplement my income in other ways to afford groceries and medical expenses and such, but this is effectively my main source of income now. And despite doing this for over a year, I still don't have any words to express how thankful for that I am. Just seriously, it means a ton. Perhaps answering some quick questions from patrons might express some of that gratitude, a little at least. The two I got this month were as follows. Kelly Mariella K asked, do you know of any artists that make art today that is similar to the art made with the constraints of the PC-98 and similar computers? So the only English language one I know of that's done a fair bit of it is H. Doom Guy, who's done that style among other things. I don't believe they're currently taking commissions, but they're good peoples and I recommend checking out their work and supporting them where possible. Otherwise, searching hashtag PC98, hashtag .a on Twitter is a good way to find stuff to peruse from mainly Japanese artists. Samuel Brooks asked, out of pure curiosity, what is the worst visual novel that you played recently? It's Possessioner. That game is mid as fuck. They also suggested checking out Parrot M. Haru for RPG Maker stuff to play, which, along with Fofu's suggestion of checking out the OG Corpse Party, are definitely on my channel to-do list now. Especially Corpse Party, that shit was my jam when I was like 15 years old. I wonder if it still holds up. Now, in my continued efforts to go against YouTube's bizarrely anti-community policies, which have seemingly stopped any hope of my channel getting monetized because I credit too many people, shout out too many people, and use too much content from others, or something like that, I don't know, this is vague as fuck. I want to shout out a couple of channels I've been enjoying lately that I think everyone watching might get a kick out of, as well as a couple of very cool VN announcements, because fuck it, if I'm not gonna get monetized, I may as well double down on this. The first channel is Questing Refuge, which focuses on discussing disability in media, and particularly portrayals of autism and how we discuss it. It's a big topic, it's a wide-ranging one given that autism has a very diverse spectrum of effects on people, including me, and through all of their videos I've been really consistently impressed by both the quality of their content and how well they explain those complex topics. It's good stuff if you want to be educated by someone with autism instead of orgs that don't have any of their interests in mind, and if you enjoy when I talk about mental health and such, then I doubly recommend checking them out. A second is Human Restoration Project, who up to this point have mostly been focused on interviews and short excerpts from them, but just recently put out a video titled What Teachers Can Learn from Video Games. And if this is the kind of direction they're going to go if they get more support, then I really hope they get it and I can contribute in any way. It's an incredible look at how it can improve classrooms and education through taking lessons from game design, going into everything from accessibility, motivation, emotional states, difficulty. It's a real impressive work, and I look forward to seeing more from them in this style if they choose to keep going like this, and I hope we get some Dark Souls swamps in classrooms. Finally, I want to point out some cool visual novel announcements that people might have missed, starting with the translation for Gore's streaming show finally being out. It's a modern classic by a very queer and creative studio, translated by a great dude and published by a great company. If you want to know more, well, please just buy it to support releases like this if you have the means, and hopefully we can get more Black Sick games out in the West, but also I'll have a video out on it sometime soon. Secondly, the second game in the PC-98 series, Sei Shoutouts Shoujo Sentai Lakers has finally been translated. I haven't had a chance to check it or the first game out, but the translator is a cool guy, and really any PC98 efforts that aren't machine translation deserve your support. And finally, Alpha Nighthawk has been released in English by Shirabune. I don't currently have any plans to cover it, but it is a Liarsoft game, who are cool, and the translation team is very talented, so if you got the chance, then it's probably worth checking out. Also, once again, I gotta give credit to my sources and people who help proofread my stuff. I'm very grateful for my friends who give corrections major and minor, and a big thanks to Castell as usual for helping with the history in this video and pointing out blind spots in my first draft. Links to their socials will be in the Patreon post in the description, along with sources and all the cool people you should check out once you're finished with this video. Thank you to all of my patrons who make it possible for me to make these long videos. I'm really happy to be creating the kind of content I am now, and I'm thankful every day I actually have some stable income to live with. If you want to support me financially and have your name on screen like all these cool people, then consider dropping a small donation on Patreon or Ko-fi. Doesn't have to be a lot, even just a single dollar one-timer once a month adds up, and you get cool benefits on Patreon like seeing these videos uncensored. But if you can't donate, no big deal, just leaving a comment, liking, subscribing, all that stuff helps the algorithm and helps me a ton, but if you can donate, yeah, that'd be cool. That's all for now, and back to the show. I mentioned what the authors of the original story draft, Mitsumi and Amayuzu, had done, but I want to spend some more time talking about them and their careers, and just how it is they're able to bring this kind of story to light. Both of them have genuinely impressive track records, originally starting as employees of Cocktailsoft in the mid-90s, before moving on to Leaf at the turn of the century. To sum those two companies up briefly, Cocktailsoft was a brand under IDES, later FNC, responsible for some gorgeous as hell mega hits on the PC98 and in the early Windows days, most notably the Can Can Bunny series and Pia Carrot series, the latter of which I did a video on the first game last year and is still one of my favorite Bishoujo ge ever created. As for Leaf, a subsidiary of Aqua Plus, they're the studio responsible for massively influential games like Shizuku, Two Heart, Utawarerumono, and White Album, some of which are regarded as all-time classics and changed the landscape of Japanese games forever. Even beyond their still ongoing time in the industry, however, they're pretty well experienced in other parts of the otaku scene. Leaf and their staff have always been in touch with otaku culture, and these two specifically have been running a circle named Cut a Dash since the mid-90s, which is where 16-Bit Sensation was initially published before Kadokawa snagged it for retail, though they went to Komiket for quite a while before, Mitsumi since 1990 and Amayuzu since 1994. There is one particular title I need to talk about within their career though, the first that they worked on at Leaf, and that's 1999's Comic Party. A chunk of the second volume of this manga, focusing on Meiko heading development of a game about making doujin works, more or less serves as Amayuzu and Mitsumi writing the history of the game's development from their perspective. More so than the rest of the series even, which is already effectively a slightly fictionalized autobiography of their careers, which is part of why it's able to land so well and feel so truthful. From Kaori's lack of faith in the idea mirroring that of Leaf's higher-ups, to Meiko's style of illustration becoming akin to what's presented in the game, the style that defined Leaf for a time, to even the broader idea of the game itself basically just being Comic Party, it all reflects truths and experiences they had in development. I can't say I'm a Comic Party expert in any way, I only played about an hour of it for this video since Edo Gamescape claims a playthrough takes about 25 on average, and I don't have that sort of time for this video, but I adored what I played. The character designs are expectedly amazing, the music is catchy as hell, and the story and characters are immensely fun. Definitely more of it enough to make up for the mixed opinions I've heard on the gameplay, and definitely enough to make me want to do a video on it in the future. It's also the first actually successful title of theirs to do the whole hybrid style of VN here that would become something of a trend for Leaf and Aqua Plus, wherein your more standard story segments are broken up with various types of gameplay, be that doujin creation simulation here, or tactical role-playing in Utawarerumono and Tears of Tiara. If you want to know more about Aqua Plus and Leaf as a whole, then I would highly suggest watching Bowl of Lentils' video on it that just recently came out. It's an incredibly well-researched history of them that helped me with making sure I was on track here, taught me a lot of new things, and it's just a damn fine watch like all of his content is. It also helps provide some extra context and drama in 16-Bit Sensation's second volume, particularly Aqua Plus's shift towards the general consumer market rather than specifically just PC Edo gamers. Back on track, Tamiki's experience with Edoge is quite different, being entirely that of an affectionate player and reader rather than creator. There's a ton of respect for titles he grew up playing overflowing from every page. Quite literally, in fact, with regular info boxes outside of the main story that add plenty of additional information about particular subjects, all of which are fun to read and easy to understand. There's even things like sales statistics and interviews, such as with Min Naraken of Alicesoft fame. I will say that I don't know how this work compares to others he created, Granted, I've only read a brief portion of Kaminomi and some of his other short stories for this video, and the fact that Mitsumi did a bulk of the story crafting makes this notably different in tone, but his shared love and excitement for the genre comes through everywhere, especially in the quality of the artwork. The style of 16-bit sensation is smooth and flowy. Outlines are distinct, thick, and gentle, the backgrounds can be abstract or simple yet always feel peaceful, and it all adds together to form a really charming and calming style. Combined with the plot's greater focus on characters and history over intricate webs of drama, this really feels like some sort of game dev yashike at points, and the character designs super help with that. Meiko's cute, lightly feminine pink and purple top and her scruffy hazel hair that I want to ruffle so damn bad, Kari's distinct and pronounced cat ear hat that contrasts with her soft and subtle personality, Kikiko and Nadako's whatever these fucking gremlins are. It's all very good stuff that you could probably get away with wearing to a supermarket, but would also make for a killer cosplay. I also adore the way paneling is done in this series, because you can really see Tamiki's years of experience working on Kaminomi come to light in a story very much unlike that. He knows both how to lead people's eyes through a page to keep things flowing seamlessly, and also knows how to toy with the formatting of a page itself. Gags that play with parallel panels, seamless transitions between 4 coma strips and regular storytelling, pages that progressively widen as you read through them. It's all perhaps a little simple, but it's executed so effortlessly and flawlessly that you just have to appreciate the quality and coherency. The drawings also reveal Tamiki's ability to tell a story purely through visuals, as even with the dialogue removed, a cohesive plot is still told and the emotions are still conveyed purely through what's shown. Expressions, people, the composition of the shots themselves, it's all very readable and results in the text not being a necessity to make sense of things. And shoutouts to the visual humor of the manga too, really just the comedy in general. There's plenty of great running jokes, fun expressions, subtle humor, witty lines that hit well no matter how many times I read them, and it's all balanced well with the more serious and casual parts of the manga. It feels lighthearted in the same way that hanging out with a bunch of good friends does. Equally as impressive as that balancing act is how well the art is able to flip between different styles as necessary. And given that this is all about making eroge in the 1990s, a time where there really was no standardized style like we have now, games from different companies and even different artists within the same company could look wildly different. All of this is captured perfectly here. Everything from the fake concept art to the fake screen caps to the fake box art of games that never really existed feel like they were pulled straight from something I could be playing on my PC98 right this instant. Hi, Future Noel here, because I crucially forgot to note that a lot of these are based on actual real games, which probably helps with this feeling, and each one is produced with as much love, care, and detail as a CG from that time would have been. Even the art styles of real games mentioned are faithfully recreated here, quite a feat given just how many show up. Tokimeki Memorial, Dokusei, Shizuku Isaku, Desire, which was a personal favorite of Tamiki's, the list goes on and on. It's a major treat as someone who knows all these games and has played quite a few of them, and the way they blend in perfectly with the fake titles is damned impressive. Which actually brings me to what I think is the most interesting thing about this manga. This is a story that is centered around the point of view of fictional people from a fictional company, yet these fictional people are based on real people and the fictional company has a real-world counterpart, and the story itself adheres closely to real-world history and events to the point that it's a legitimately good historical and biographical reference. And I mean this in a few ways. Obviously there's the element of eroge history being one of the main focus of this book, but this also goes in terms of larger Japanese history, as the manga does not shy away from showing the impact that major events had on people. What is most striking, however, is how the manga uses this blend of real and surreal to more effectively convey the emotions and sentiments of the time by embellishing real histories with characters based on real people, who as well are informed by not only history, but the memories and feelings of those who were there at the time. So this all leads me to ask, does this manga count as fiction? It doesn't make sense to classify it as such to me, since while there are many made-up elements, it's also by and large faithful to reality. And sure, these characters in this company never really existed, but they're all based on real people and real things. From Tamiki's days at school computer clubs to Meiko being somewhat of a stand-in for Mitsumi herself, and most of the history you're seeing is spot on. But non-fiction doesn't make sense either because, well, these exact people never really existed. They're either fictional versions of real people or conglomerations of many people's years of experiences and feelings towards an industry. So which label is more accurate? Or perhaps maybe a better question to ask is how and why do we draw such black and white lines between what's fiction and not? And to best explore this, I want to take a brief detour to talk about a film in a genre that does much of the same balancing act. Salesman is a 1969 American documentary directed by the Maisleys brothers that focuses on the real lives of 4 door-to-door Bible salesmen as they struggle to make ends meet, traveling from city to city in hopes of making a living off of selling scripture to poor and middle-class Catholics. While on the surface that might sound immensely boring to watch, what makes the film work is the way it's put together. It's expertly shot with a keen eye for how to capture the reality of a situation and edited in such a way that turns countless hours of disparate footage about 4 people's lives into a single hour-and-a-half long cohesive narrative, painting a depressing and discomforting picture of the lives these people live, all of them hoping to survive as they pressure people who can hardly afford food into buying expensive literature they have no need for. There's uncomfortably long takes, anxiety-laden close-ups, long stretches of nothingness, and all structured so as to create an underlying theme about what capitalism can force people into. Poverty, scamming, manipulation, shame, exploitation, and deep sadness with the vague hopes that success can come if you keep trying hard enough. It's a powerful and brutally depressing film, one that genuinely felt like it was taking my soul out of my body as I watched it, but the thing is, that was constructed. These men did not live out an ensemble cast and narrative arc about capitalism hurting their lives and the lives of others. They didn't have sparse music playing in the background to heighten emotions. They didn't have unrelated voiceovers playing in their train rides. And these events never really happened the exact way we're seeing them in the film, with the cuts for tension and close-ups of people nearly crying as they contemplate whether they'll see another month. While everything we see in the film did happen, everything is real, the cohesive story and the way it was wound in a drama was created through arrangement of those real events. The narrative is not real. And this is the entire point of the direct cinema genre that it and all the Maisleys brothers films fall under. It's a genre that works backwards to create stories and film from reality that feels as if it's prying us to question the reality of what we're watching and what our relationship to the reality of the media is. So does that make them fiction or non-fiction? Part of the poignancy of all this for me comes with the fact that it plays with the culture of the English language itself, with how stark that contrast can be for us, as not every language works like this. Arabic is possibly the most widely spoken example to be ambiguous about what a story is, but some smaller languages such as the Kenyan language the Kikuyu have this trait too. According to the Kenyan author Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the main word used for story, rigla, can mean some grand fable just as easily could be a historical account of a long battle, and there's a far wider spectrum of words for specific types of stories. In his own words, the art is in the telling, not the fact of the story. The best storyteller is the one who recreates the anxiety of expectation and fulfills it. The last part of that quote is why stories like Salesman and 16-Bit Sensations sometimes need to, in a way, lie to us with their presentation of reality to make the facts more resonant. Because if Salesman was totally honest with us about what it is, if it were not structured as a drama to hook us, then the very real emotions and pains it represents that these people were feeling wouldn't be felt by us, too. They would be dulled and we'd struggle to connect with the realities the salesmen know that the film wants us to know and understand. Of course, this can go entirely wrong. Salesman is a good piece of direct cinema because it's mostly based in reality and doesn't diverge except to drive home points. It constructs a narrative, yes, and there are some parts that may not be entirely true to how things happened, but for the most part it is being honest with us so we can place our faith in it. And then there's some reality shows, descendants of the work that the Maisleys brothers did in terms of cinematography, editing, and directing, which warp and contort reality so far as to not even resemble reality anymore. Those, and many documentaries, don't aim to make you understand a portion of the world on an emotional and factual level. They're trying to sell you on a soulless version of it consumable en masse that takes all the complexities away, or make you believe in something false. And this isn't even getting into myths that are partly based in history but exist mostly to rile up people for a cause. I'm not talking about fascism in another goddamn video right away. 16-Bit Sensation is a prime example of embellishing right. I could watch 100 boring and only arguably more real documentaries about creating games, and sure, I would learn a lot about making games. Maybe, if they don't cut the parts of it that suck out. But no amount of accuracy beyond a certain point would tap into and embody the mix of feelings I've had over years and years of pouring my heart out into making games, and those feelings are what lay at the core of making art. You gotta embellish for that. You have to make reality into a tale that people want to hear. And that's something this manga achieves by weaving the memories of two creators together with the histories and emotions of people they know, put onto paper and ink by an artist who knows his craft well and how to get his readers in hook, line, and sinker. And I don't think there is any part that embodies this better than something close to the end of the second volume. After Alcohol Soft's last hit game, the team gets together to discuss what their next project should be, and Meiko speaks out with her idea, a game about a group who makes doujinshi inspired by their own time at Comiket. And Kari is hesitant to go through with this idea, believing there not to be much of a market for such a title, but Meiko is insistent on going through with it, only to hit a major problem. No matter how much she tries, despite all of her experience, she's hit an artist's block and can't come up with what the main heroine should look like, something the manga drills in earlier as being massively important early on to hook players. Even as the rest of the staff is cheering her on and excited for the title, even as they think of her as a prodigy, she still struggles to come up with anything. Until one night where she's alone at her desk, staring at her computer screen and thinking. She puts her left hand on the keyboard like she always does, looks at the warm glow of her monitor, grabs her pen, and after a brief moment of thought, she smiles gently and begins to draw anew. This one illustration with these people that never existed, with this computer that no one ever owned, feels more real to me in my experiences than any developer story I've read online or any photograph or video of me at my desk. The soft, contemplative curve of her lips, the light emanating from the old tube display, the hand softly grasping a pen like I would softly touch a key on a musical keyboard, the slight hunched over pose, and the quiet, thoughtful love for the work she's doing, even with all the prior frustration over being unable to create something. Every time I look at this panel, I'm reminded of all the hours I spent late at night hacking away at programs that look barely more advanced than a terminal from the 1980s. I'm reminded of how often I would be alone in my room, surrounded by games I love and books that inspired me and shows that made me want to express myself, attempting to steel my resolve to keep writing even as I felt I couldn't write another note. And I feel nostalgic almost in a way. That makes me happy that I got to craft things I love with people who I enjoy being around and sharing a vision with. And really, I think that's what the goal of making games is. That's what the goal of making anything is to me. I make these videos because I want to share what I love with people and I want them to be engaged with it and enjoy it the ways that I do. So while the people of this manga may have never existed, the emotions, the hopes, and the dreams that they display do. The dreams of wanting to be known and heard, of wanting to reach out and make an impact on those they know and those they will never know, are the same that I hope people experience when they listen to my music, and they are the same that I want to feel through the work of others. And no amount of exaggeration will ever change how real those feelings are. If anything, it can only make them feel more real. 16-bit Sensation, even though it's not finished, is in my mind one of the best manga in recent memory. It's an endearing, loving ride through an ever-important and defining era of gaming with lovely characters, gorgeous art, a strong sense of humor, and an incredible historical hook guiding the path of the plot. But more than all of that, it's a story in which you can really truly feel the passion and love the authors have for what they're crafting in every part of it. It's a story that embodies the feelings of the era from the people who were there, both as creator and consumer, and one that resonates strongly with me as someone who loves what that era brought to us and loves creating art for everyone to enjoy. Like I said before, it's the only story I've seen that understands on a deep level the highs and the lows, the triumphs and the failures, and the love for the craft that goes into something people enjoy every single day. It's a story that knows how to blur lines and seems to take joy in it, sitting neither purely in the realm of fiction, yet neither in the realm of nonfiction, all in service of creating a tale that can truly make history resonate with people who were never there, in service of embodying the joys and sorrows of creation better than a simple recounting can. And that is the beauty of telling a story.